Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policymaking for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast are Tim Cairns, former Special Advisor to Peter Robinson and Head of Policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hey, David.
And we also have Michael McKernan, who's a former Special Advisor to the SDLP. He worked in the executive from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David, and hello, Tim.
Hi, Michael.
Okay, on the podcast today, we are looking at the programme for government. Yes, for the first time since 2011, Northern Ireland has a programme for government. We're looking at what it is promising, how likely it is to be delivered, and how we got through implementing the last one from 2011 to 2016. Then we're going to look at the DUP deputy leadership. Who will get the post? Why does it matter for the future of the party? And should there be a coronation or a contest? You can watch it all on YouTube. Search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. Head to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can also follow us on X, watch clips on TikTok and Instagram, and subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. We also have a WhatsApp number. We want you to get in touch with us and feedback on what you're hearing on the podcast. The WhatsApp number is 0333 404 6507. That number again is 0333 404 6507. It's great for sending your comments, questions, and voice notes as you're listening to the podcast, and we'll read them out on our next episode. But you can also send us an email. That's hello@stormontsources.com. Okay, gents, our first topic today, we're going to look at the programme for government. Yes, as we were saying at the top of the pod, for the first time since 2011, we have a programme for government in Northern Ireland. Now, just a caution, this is only until 2027 when we go back to the polls, but it's the first programme for government that we've had for over a decade. This is the first one that has gotten over the line. Since then, the plan is called Doing What Matters Most. This was unanimously agreed by the four parties at the executive table last week. However, some disagreements are already becoming apparent, with the health minister saying that he wasn't familiar with some of the language in there. That was then refuted by the deputy first minister, Emma Little-Pengelly. So already, within a few days, the executive parties don't seem to be on the same page. Michael, I'm going to go to you first on this. What do you make of Doing What Matters Most? Do you think that it has a chance of actually kind of resolving many of the public policy challenges we have in Northern Ireland? Are you an optimist?
Well, I am an optimist, but I'm not optimistic about this. I think it's not really a programme for government. I think it would be more honest to call it a vision for government, and to just accept, here's a direction of travel, here's some of the things we care about, here's some of the things we'd like to change or reform, but there's no detail about how they go about doing it or what resources would be allocated to that. And when challenged on that, it appears they say, well, we have to wait for the budget. But the people who write the PFG write the budget, so they can put the money where the aspiration is if they so choose. So that whole thing of Mike Nesbitt not knowing whether the money or not, or surprised to even find the words in the document, doesn't surprise me. In fact, it nearly re-traumatised me, and it takes me back to the very first programme for government when devolution returned, programme for government 2008 to 2011, building a better future. But when I went back and looked at it, sure enough, there were 300 measurable targets in it. Each department was assigned a public service agreement that it had to deliver on. And it was actually a genuinely ambitious programme for government. And they'd set up the apparatus as well of how the programme would be programme managed. Now, I've every respect for the fact that our current executive only has 2 years to run, and that's not a lot of time to run programmes. But anyway, the success of that in the case of the first programme for government was it's actually the cause of its undoing. And that was that they tried to programme manage it, and they found resistance to the idea of it being managed and performance managed. And the reason is this: the way the executive works, it is totally dominated today and since it was re-established in 2007 by the two parties at the centre. The non-DUP or Sinn Fein ministers are lucky to get some of the crumbs off the table. We were delighted that housing featured strongly in the programme for government in the first one, because that was our departmental priority. But we then discovered that targets had been set for us by OFM, DFM, that we had no part, a bit like Mike Nesbitt, we had no act or part in. We had responsibility for regeneration. And there, lo and behold, in the programme for government was you're going to get 300 million of private investment brought in to generate this next Victoria Square follow-up, the then called Royal Exchange. We're actually very good with the names in Northern Ireland, Victoria Square and Royal Exchange. But anyway, that's now become Tribeca. But it's an area of desolation in Belfast. Today it hasn't even started. And yet we were supposed to deliver that in 2 or 3 years' time. The reason the department had those powers was they could assemble the site for a major regeneration project.
So
anyway,
Michael,
yeah,
so
go ahead.
just on what you were saying there, because obviously you were a SPAD to a party that only had one seat in the executive back in 2007 and in 2011. I know you were talking there about, you were getting some kind of flashbacks there when Mike Nesbitt talked about, obviously, the Ulster Unionists are the sole party in there. I mean, but he controls a department, health, for example, which is the biggest department, 51% of spending. I mean, the programme for government saying they're going to treat 70,000 extra people. You've just talked about there about some of the things that haven't been delivered. So do you think as a sole minister in there that Mike, just because he doesn't have any natural party allies around the table, do you think that's maybe going to inhibit his ability to drive forward to even meet some of the modest targets on health that's in this?
Yes, he is entirely in the hands of the parties at the centre, as every single minister is. It's a lonely place being a sole minister, and you have very little power. For example, executive meetings take place, and I'm sure this is still the case, but it certainly was in my time, that you go along to an executive meeting. Sometimes you'd be hanging around waiting for it to start because the real executive meeting wasn't over, and that was a meeting between the DUP and Sinn Fein, which preceded every executive meeting, so that they could agree how everything was going to be decided, what would be on the agenda, what way it would go, and then we would meet as an executive and it would all be voted through formally in a reasonable atmosphere, icy civility, I would call it. But the power lay with Sinn Féin and the DUP, and it still does. If Mike wants, if they really wanted to do that 70,000, why couldn't they put that number in the programme for government and guarantee it? Because it is something like 2% of the health budget, and they've 20 billion to spend when they go back to the budget exercise at the executive, and they could easily have put that in as a firm commitment, but they chose not to. So they're hanging Mike out to dry still on reform and on weightiness, and he'll have few allies. Even though I don't doubt that some of the parties at the centre would like to see progress on weightiness, etc. But I think the public doesn't understand that the DUP and Sinn Féin don't have 70 or 80% of the power because they control the executive. They have 95% of the power, and individual ministers are not free in their own departments to do what they like. They can be hauled into executive at any time, and something they want to do can be stopped immediately. That's the reality.
I have to say, Michael, icy civility. We always, every time you came in, we got you a cup of tea and a scone. I remember even times coming out of the pre-meeting and delivering you your coffee myself.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Sorry,
that's the other thing.
The
other thing is, you get the impression there was a draft programme for government and it went out to public consultation, and there was this fantastic consultation exercise, and then it came back into the centre, and then the parties would have got together and gone over all the consultation responses and then negotiated a final thing. That wouldn't have happened. It would have come back into the executive office, and they, with their officials, would have cobbled together the final programme for government. And then the likes of Andrew Muir, Naomi and Mike would have had an hour with it before they were required to approve it.
Michael makes a great point. Michael makes a great point. Nobody reads the consultation responses.
Yes. Well,
So,
some
okay,
officials
well,
might.
well-
Some officials might.
Okay, well, that's good for the more than 1,400 people who actually took time to actually respond to the bloody thing. But in terms, Tim, of actually said, because this has actually come up again, because again, one thing you get when documents like this come out, Michael's talked about the power balance in the executive. So it was delayed, its publication was delayed, or the announcement of the agreement was delayed by 24 hours, because Andrew Muir said, the Alliance Party minister, hang on here, we haven't read this properly yet. we need time, so it was delayed by 24 hours. So what do you make of the power dynamic within the executive? And just, the programme for government does have some nice lofty language in it about, we're going to help with housing. So there's about 6,000 houses, which is actually a relatively modest target by 2027. You're also talking there about, again, we're talking there about waiting lists, childcare, so on and so forth. So, Tim, what did you make of the content, but also that power dynamic in the executive?
Well, I don't know why the parties bother with a programme for government, because obviously it's just going to be ripped apart. Donald Trump the other night said to the Democrats, it doesn't matter what I do, you're never going to applaud it. You're never going to see anything good in what I do. I would be quite tempted, I think, if I was the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, to say to the press in Northern Ireland, it doesn't matter what we do. You're not going to look positively on it, because here's the thing: we have a press corps in Northern Ireland. There's no executive. There's no Stormont. Oh, we could have streets paved with gold. We could have services for everyone if only we had an executive. Then the executive comes back, well, you're all rubbish. Tear it down. Your programme for government's useless. I wonder what the press in Northern Ireland are looking for. I really do. Because all I've seen is this pseudo negativity. And I've even read and listened to people who say, well, let's compare this to Scotland. Well, let's not compare it to Scotland. Scotland is one party that's setting a programme for government. If it was my political party and it was me setting a programme for government, the programme for government would be costed with targets and with deliverables, and you can hold me to account. And if you don't like what I say and you don't like my party, well, then you can vote us out at the next election and we can vote the opposition in Scotland. Labour were gaining some traction. I think Labour aren't gaining any traction anymore. They could have replaced the SNP. Probably not going to happen. But at least there's that ability to have that cross the aisle debate.
I think you think you're on Hollywood Sources, Tim. You're stealing Callum and Andy and Jeff's lines here.
Well, I think, but we've heard that this week. That there's this comparison to Scotland. There is no comparison to Scotland. Let's forget that. And I think we've got to take this document for what it is. And I actually think it's a pretty reasonable attempt to try and bring together all of the things that people in Northern Ireland think are the most important topics to be delivered by the executive. And I think if you look at it, waiting lists, that's what people want solved. If you're a parent, childcare is what is preventing you and your family from flourishing. Housing. If you're on the waiting list for housing in Northern Ireland, we need to desperately build housing. We need to desperately build the infrastructure for housing. So the things that are in this document, violence against women and girls, a huge problem in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has a violence against women and girls problem, more so than the rest of the United Kingdom. And so these things are priorities. These things are what the public, by and large, want to be delivered. So I think, that should be applauded, because we've got an executive where you've got possibly the most left-wing political party who's in government and possibly the most right-wing political party that's in government anywhere in the UK, trying to agree something with people who stand somewhere in between. And I think this is a pretty good effort for that. And I also think they brought forward some really good plans in and around delivery. A delivery unit, they're going to embrace AI in terms of delivery and start to have embryonic ways to move forward with that. Nobody's talked about that. Well, let's just ignore it. Let's have people screaming on the radio, where's the money, instead of looking at actually what's going on behind this document. Honestly, I'll go back to what I said at the start. I think it'd be fair for the First and Deputy First Minister to call the media out in Northern Ireland.
Oh, okay.
Can't agree with that. Can't agree with that at all. That is a rose-tinted view of a document which, as I say, is not a programme for government. It is a vision for government full of nice sentiment. And the priorities, yes, Tim's right, the priorities are good priorities. But what are you going to do about them? What are you going to do? It's not in the document. And yet there's a couple of couple of big outliers in the document which does justify the 15 minutes it takes to read it. One is, and it hasn't attracted any comment, Mike Nesbitt's money has, but there's 1.3 billion. 1.3 billion will be invested in stimulating regeneration and tourism in the next few years. That line is in the document. Where on earth are they getting 1.3 billion for regeneration and tourism? And where is that coming from? And what what is behind that number? I'd love to know.
Well, David, you're part of this media. You're Slugger O'Toole's deputy editor. So I'm going to ask you a question, right? What do the media expect? What do the media want? We have an executive, right, where it's difficult to get anything agreed because of the different political persuasions we have. That's what we're stuck with. What are you expecting these politicians to deliver?
Well, I just think you're just annoyed because obviously Radio Ulster hasn't been in touch to ask you on. Probably, I think that's more what you're annoyed about, Tim. But I think that in terms of the media, look, the media has panned it. There's no question about it. I did a segment yesterday on Talkback with William Crawley, and we were talking after the interview with the Deputy First Minister about the system, and I do think we have systemic problems in Northern Ireland that I think are worth more of the attention. I think that was where the conversation needs to move. So, for example, we've combined government departments, which have not worked. Again, Tim, you were probably part of that deal and that handiwork to merge the departments together. So this is why you've got infrastructure, which just doesn't seem to be capable of building infrastructure. We've got a Department for Economy that isn't working the way it should. We've got DERA, which isn't working the way that it should. The environment and agriculture together, that's not working the way that it should. And I think the problem is that you can have all the programme for governments with all the ambition and the targets in the world. And you're right, Tim, we can lament the political class as much as we want, right? But until we actually change how we do government, you know, whether it's the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP, because in all lands were making these barbs to Matthew O'Toole during the week in the chamber, said, look, you guys led executives before and look at the performance. Same thing, DUP and Sinn Fein from 2007, look at the performance. We've now got Alliance in there in bigger numbers and look at the performance as well. So I do think that there's a system conversation that needs to happen. But I think it is a wee bit easy just to turn around and go, well, the media are too negative. Media are negative everywhere. Look, go ask John Swinney what he thinks about the Scottish media. Go ask Keir Starmer what he thinks about the British media. Micheál Martin about what he thinks about the Irish press corps. Politicians will always give out about negative coverage from the media, Tim.
But I don't think it's good enough, David. I honestly don't think it's good enough to just simply say, well, we just need to change the system.
We do need to change the system,
Hold on. We're talking specifically about the programme for government. Let's take the system that we've got. That's a separate conversation. What do you want politicians to do for a programme for government that would be received positively by the press? That's the question I'm asking. Forget about system change. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen anytime soon. We're going to get to the election in 2027. We're going to have to do this process again. You're First Minister, David. What do you change and what do you do to make this more positively received by the press? Because I can't see. Well, I've got a couple of ideas, but I'll hear yours first.
Well, here's the positive thing, and it'd be interesting to get both your takes on it. When I look back, Michael went back to the previous programmes for government. They were big, they were lofty. 2007, we had direct rule for about 5 years, and St Andrews was meant to resolve the kind of wider governance issues. The governance issues that, according to the DUP. It didn't do that. The 2007 to 2011 programme for government, again, Michael's highlighted some of the issues there. The 2011 programme for government promised big talk on waiting lists, for example. I mean, you actually go back and look at some of the stuff that was said there. Very little of it was actually delivered, and they had a full mandate in that time to actually deliver it. So I think this one, the real positive of it is trying to do less, but I think do it better. I think that is a real positive as well. I think, for example, if you're looking at what I would do, there are two big ticket items that I think matter for people in Northern, matter mostly to the middle classes in Northern Ireland, because that only seems to be when the political class get into action here, is when the middle classes start complaining about something. Healthcare is one. So they are promising the 70,000 extra. Again, I would look at how, for example, and Emma Pengelly has talked about this, what we're spending, but how we can actually spend it better. And Tim, that does touch on the system change point, by the way. So that's the Deputy First Minister who's in there has identified that, by the way, for your let's not worry about it argument. And then number two, I think childcare, for the very simple reason, it's a big economic driver. But this also goes back to another point. I'm gonna sound like Keith Archibald or John O'Dowd here. One of the big reasons why devolved institutions, maybe outside Scotland, don't actually maybe tackle this is because the executive can make big gains on childcare, but they don't get the revenue benefit from it. You know, that if you get more people in direct income tax and national insurance, that doesn't stay with Stormont, that goes over to Westminster. So until we actually get a better conversation on economic drive here, and until they get those powers, I think that policy innovation will be lacking. But childcare, healthcare.
please never get tax powers like that in Northern Ireland. Please no.
I think. I
Please
disagree with
no.
that because
No,
because
I agree.
because
I
there's no
agree.
incentive funds.
I agree. If we've proven comprehensively that we can't manage very much, why would we take on more, especially heavy duty stuff like taxation? Just on the previous programme for government, we had a red, amber, green system of monitoring progress on the 300 targets, and there were quarterly reports by delivery units, etc., etc. And each quarterly report just became redder and redder and less green, to the point that it was just an embarrassment. And they eventually just stopped doing them. And then there were supposed to be ministerial monitoring meetings where some minister wasn't measuring up, and the first and deputy first would call the naughty schoolboy in for a chat. And of course, ministers stopped going to them. How do you think you are telling me how to run my department? Type of thing. So
I like Michael that you made Northern Ireland less grey.
All subsequent programmes became touchy-feely, sentimental, aspirational after that first one, because they realised they couldn't do much.
Well, one of the other interesting innovations, and it has been noted upon, but I do think it is an interesting one, is the establishment of a delivery unit within the executive of it. Now, I know this was mocked, but I remember when Tony Blair created a delivery unit within Number 10 Downing Street, it was widely mocked. But interestingly, I was listening to David Cameron, and he was someone who in opposition thought, oh, this is Blair nonsense. However, when he became Prime Minister, he said he'd wished he'd made it bigger. He said it is absolutely essential to do that. And I know this has been asked of the executive about, how big will this delivery unit be? And Tim, taking your point, there are 4 parties in this executive. Obviously, when Blair did it and Cameron had it, you had 1 party or 2 parties in government together, so you need everyone to feed into that. But I do think
who'll be in it? Who will be in it? Who has got the skill set to manage this programme aggressively for the executive? It's not the current crop of civil servants.
But this goes back, Michael, to what you were saying. I mean, the SDLP, for example, Michael, I don't know whether you were an architect of this strategy where the executive would agree a budget and the SDLP minister would vote for it, but the parliamentary SDLP party would vote against it.
Yeah.
So again, it's that disjoined nature in there. Just in terms of Tim, because this is often being talked about, right? And you've actually been there, right? So I want to know, Tim, this thing about, we were talking there a wee bit about the 2 main parties get in a room, they gang up, and they deliberately target the parties with sole ministers, and that in this case is just the Ulster Unionist Party. How true is that? How true was that?
Oh, goodness. I don't know if we've time to unpack that. I think with Mike Nesbitt, it is slightly different because he's in the health department. And while, people say we don't want to play politics with health, and of course we all play politics with health, but I think Mike is in a slightly different position because I don't think people can be seen to be cutting healthcare in the way, if you go back to Michael McKernan's time when he was health minister, and, there was cuts to his budget, there was, I don't want to say ganging up, but his budget was sliced and money was reallocated elsewhere. And Michael McKernan at that time said this is a big mistake. But coming back on healthcare, and I think there's always been pushback in the health minister because I think the health budget now is up around 7 billion or something like that.
It's near it's around 8.
No, around 8 billion now. We're looking at 135 million a year would solve the waiting list crisis. 135 million out of 8 billion. That's a rounding error. So, I would almost say to Mike Nesbitt, instead of screaming and shouting with the Nolan show on at 9 o'clock every morning, where's the money? My question to Mike Nesbitt would be, where's your savings? Who's the Elon Musk in your department who's coming in and finding where the money's being wasted? And I think, look, we can sort of sneer at that as you've just done, David. But I think that, we need someone to come in, I think, in a delivery unit. And Michael's absolutely right. We don't have the expertise right now to do that. We're going to have to bring that expertise in. We need someone to come in and look at government waste and look where that money's being wasted and find ways to reallocate that. And I think that's important. I don't think it was so much ganging up, and I think certainly the ministers from smaller parties thought it was ganging up. I think there was an attempt at that time to try and deal with some of that government waste, but it was probably dealt with in a way that wasn't effective. Now, maybe you don't like the sort of approach that America's taken, and fair enough, it does look a bit aggressive, sledgehammer to crack a nut. But I do think that we need to look at that here and see, are there ways to make efficiencies? Because I think Mike Nesbitt could clearly make efficiencies that would make hundreds of millions of savings within his department.
But given
how's
the
he going to
money
get on
is
to
so
that?
small, given as a proportion of his overall budget, why couldn't they commit to it in the programme? Why did they have to qualify it? Why couldn't they commit to the 135 million?
And just on this, just in terms of that there, because obviously there's a wider point to this now, because obviously whenever the executive produces a programme for government, we also have an opposition who reacts to it. So Matthew O'Toole was pretty quick out of the traps critiquing it, as naturally an opposition leader would do. You'd be more amazed if he turned around and patted them on the back. But he was actually, I was surprised in the executive office questions with Michelle O'Neill. He was actually quite strident, quite strong in his criticism. He accused the DUP of taking Sinn Fein for fools. He talked about basically the DUP side deal that was agreed last year about the bodies like Intertrade UK being raised onto the same plane as the Good Friday Agreement institutions such as the British Irish Council, the North-South Ministerial Council. Michelle O'Neill said he was asking fools questions of the programme for government. Michael, what did you make of our opposition leader and how they reacted to it? Do you think it was effective? Did it cut through?
I don't think it's cut through. It's marginally effective, but it's predictable. I mean, he said the things he sort of had to say, but he could have, if you read it forensically, he could have asked about what's this 1.3 billion for tourism and regeneration? Where's that come out of? A specific big number, and he could have pressed on some of the numbers, and he could have reminded people that the same people who write the programme for government are the same people who do the budget, and they agree it behind closed doors, and then they present it to the smaller parties who have an hour to read it, sign off. He could have drawn that out much more, that this is an unsatisfactory process democratically, but also that they shouldn't be making excuses about money because they control both the policy and the money. The two go together.
Okay, Tim, what do you make of the opposition's response?
I think Michael's hit the nail on the head there. It was utterly predictable. And I just think, it's just this punch and Judy effect. I mean, the SDLP were just taking their energy from the press, and they were seeing this open door in the press, and just, we're just walking through that open door, and we're just effective, I think, as some people in the press who were criticising things with some technical knowledge around health and some of the other issues in the programme for government. And I just don't think there's any cut through from that at all. I just think the SDLP need to look at this in a bit more of an innovative way and try to be a little more nuanced, I think, in their criticism. And I think they absolutely failed in that this week.
Okay, it's interesting enough that the two of you are critical, because we have mentioned this before on the pod, that we've talked a wee bit about kind of how the opposition get that traction with the electorate. And there is 2 years ago, because we were chatting just before we came on, me and Michael, about the fact that this time 2 years, the Assembly will be getting ready to be dissolved ahead of the election in May of 2027. So in terms of that, Michael, what could they say in a bit more detail about country? Because I know we talk about policy, but going back to Tim's thing, people don't even read party manifestos. I mean, people like me read manifestos. The public don't read manifestos. Yeah. I mean, I was talking last week about the family member I know who voted Alliance, literally just because they saw Naomi Long on a TV programme and thought, oh, I like her, so I'm going to vote for that party, even though she wasn't even standing in their constituency. So how does Matthew O'Toole get that kind of that Naomi Long moment through things like this?
I think it's very, very difficult for the SDLP. Now, Matthew is a very good performer as an individual, and he's a clever guy and has put in a shift on this. But I think the SDLP have a fundamental underlying problem, and that is it's not clear what entirely they are about that differentiates them from others. What is their unique offer? Now, for many years when they were successful, it was pretty clear what they stood for. There was the famous single transferable speech, etc. So the SDLP needs to have a strategy that gets a message across, repeat it ad nauseum. Here's the three things we're about, and we're about them, and others couldn't do them.
Yeah.
And until they get their opposition into that kind of groove, I don't think they're cutting through at all.
Yeah, if I was the SDLP opposition, I would be talking about one issue, and housing. There are all these new middle class voters that have gone over to Sinn Fein that the SDLP have lost.
Yeah.
Their kids can't buy houses. They're struggling to buy houses. That, I think, in 2027, if it's a crisis now, it'll be even bigger. And there is something I think they can play upon in that Sinn Féin only really care about a housing crisis when it's in the Republic. Yes. They don't typically care about it in the North.
But it's been successful for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think they need to turn that into that narrative. Whether the rights or wrongs of it, I do think they need to run on that.
The SDLP don't know who their opponent is, and I think that's absolutely right. You've both hit the nail on the head. I think for, since 2003, the election campaign they've ran every year is stop the DUP. Well, they're not competing against the DUP, and I think you're absolutely right. They've got to take an issue that Sinn Féin are weak on in Northern Ireland, and I think housing is potentially one of those issues, and hammer that. That's the only way they're going to recover.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, let's move on to our next topic. Okay, there is a vacancy in a political party. Now, pause for a moment. You wouldn't actually know about it, but it is the deputy leadership of the Democratic Unionist Party. Yes, the deputy leadership of the largest Unionist Party in Northern Ireland is up for grabs. Suzanne Breen in the Belfast Telegraph is reporting that the position is due to be filled, and there is a little bit of confusion about, will there be a contest? Will there be a coronation? The Deputy First Minister, who was muted as potentially being one of the candidates in the Belfast Telegraph over the weekend, was asked by William Crawley on Talkback whether she was a candidate and whether there would be a contest. And she gave what I think is a bizarre answer of, we cannot comment on internal party processes. This is for the deputy leadership, by the way, of the party. This isn't like some disciplinary issue. Tim, I have to go to you. Now, the Belfast Telegraph, Suzanne Breen is reporting that Michelle McElveen, who's the former Minister for the Environment, former Education Minister, former Regional Development Minister, seen to be traditionally on the more traditional wing of the DUP, is the favourite to take up the post that Gavin Robinson vacated. That's the other thing. This post has been vacant since Gavin Robinson stepped up to the leadership last year. So, Tim, what do you make? Are we heading for a coronation or for a contest?
Well, we were talking about this earlier on in the week, and I said to you there won't be an election, and then you sent me Suzanne Breen's article, as if that sort of changed my mind. There was going to be 3 candidates in her initial article, and I never thought there would be an election in this. I think the delay has been for some practical reasons. I think there's a couple. A leader can only be elected at an AGM, and the AGM's usually in and around the spring, so that makes sense that it's only come to the fore now. And I think the second thing is that the party rules have been being updated and changed.
Yeah, so just on that, just for clarity, just because previously, when Gavin Robinson and Jonathan Buckley went off against each other for the deputy leadership the year before last, and then in 2021, it's the DUP parliamentary party that elect the leader, the deputy leader, and then that would have went to the party officers who would have ratified the decision. So do we have any idea about what that's changed? I know it's not a membership vote. It's
no,
not right.
I don't think it's going to move too far from what the rules were before, but I think those are the 2 issues. It's really, the rules were changing, and obviously the AGM is required to do this. But I never believed there was going to be a leadership or deputy leadership contest. There's actually really only been, as I can remember, 2 deputy leader contests in the history of the DUP. One was the last deputy leader election, which was Gavin Robinson against Jonathan Buckley, and Gavin won that. And the only other one has been in 1987, when Peter Robinson briefly resigned.
2021, Tim.
So,
2021, Tim. Paula Bradley, Gregory Campbell in 2021.
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that. I thought Paula was the only nominee. But yes, absolutely. So Paula Bradley. And then 1987, Peter Robinson briefly resigned when his task force report was not accepted by Ian Paisley. And he felt that his position as deputy leader was undermined, so he resigned. And a month or 2 later, there was a deputy leadership election between him and William McCrea. And whoever you believe in that, did William McCrea lose by 2 votes, or was it a landslide? I don't know. But let's go with the narrative. It was by 2 votes that he lost. It was a close call. How different would Northern Ireland have been? And, we could spend a whole podcast speculating on what might have happened after 1987. But I did not believe there was going to be a leadership election. The DUP, I think it would be crazy to have a deputy leadership election at this time.
Tim? This is the interesting thing. So for all the talk about, because, you think about the criticism that gets heaped on Sinn Féin about shadowy figures. John O'Dowd challenged Michelle O'Neill for the vice presidency of the party in 2019. it was a contest. There was the people voted at an Ardèche. We know the results of it. Owen Tennyson was on the pod last week. Kate Nicholl went up against him. We knew they were candidates as well. SDLP had a contest in 2015 when Colm Eastwood challenged Alistair MacDonald, and then there was Fergal McKinney versus Dolores Kelly. We knew about it. It was there. Why are the DUP so afraid? Is it because that they're still scarred by what happened in 2021, where the first time in the history they had a contest?
No. Well, the contest in 1987, sorry, wasn't the first leadership contest.
Leadership contest, yeah, but are they just still scarred from 2021?
No, I don't think they are. I think from Gavin's perspective, you've seen the difficulty over the last week, the Suzanne Breen in the Belfast Telegraph, just speculating, speaking to sources. I don't think it's bizarre that Diane Dodds on the radio on Good Morning Ulster said that she's not going to be prepared to talk about internal party matters. I think Emma saying that yesterday on Talkback, I think it is perfectly reasonable and perfectly acceptable, because unfortunately, whenever the DUP speak about any internal party mechanisms or anything that's happening internally, it becomes much bigger news than it does for any other party. You highlight all of these other parties, they don't get the negative response. I feel like I'm on a tirade against the press today, but they don't get the negative response that the DUP seems to engender.
I think the Sinn Féin press office just laughed out loud there, Tim, if you're honestly saying they don't get...
I don't think anybody gets quite the negativity that the DUP does. And look, at the end of the day, deputy leader of any party, and not to disrespect anybody who's deputy leader of any party, but this is true of any party across the United Kingdom, big or small, the deputy leader's position is not a position that is of any real significance except internally. This is an internally significant position. It's not an externally significant position. And I think, it would be, I think having an electoral contest on this would just put light and put heat on the DUP that it just doesn't really need, because I don't actually believe that the narrative that the press put forward, that there's these bubbling and simmering factions within the DUP, I don't believe that's true. Maybe in 2021 that emerged at that time, where there was people fighting over the future of the party when Arlene Foster was ousted. I don't get the sense that there's that sense now. I've spoken to people over the last few days on all sides of the party, supposedly all these factions in the party as there were in 2021, and I don't get any sense of that at all. Universally, Gavin Robinson is acclaimed as doing a fantastic job as leader. Universally, he has been acclaimed as someone who has brought a different tone to leadership. Universally, he's been claimed by people internally as someone who's approachable, as someone who can be spoken to. All of the things that were negative about previous leaders, Gavin is not doing those things. So I think why would he have a leadership contest? What he needs is somebody that he can work with to bring forward reforms internally. And I think that's why we're seeing Michelle McIlveen's name move forward. I think it needs to be a woman. I think it needs to be somebody who's popular internally. She is exceptionally popular internally. I know Suzanne Breen criticised her in the Belfast Telegraph for today for not doing press, but your deputy leader doesn't need to do press. Your deputy leader needs to be the person internally who's driving reform, who's been the person that's the eyes and ears of the leader, who the leader can trust, who people internally trust as well. That bridge between the MLAs, between the ordinary members and the leadership. And she is someone who can do that. She is absolutely fantastic at that role. She's been party secretary for years, where she's been fulfilling that role. And I think, she's a very canny choice as deputy leader.
God, you sound like a recruitment agent there reciting her CV in such detail.
Well,
so,
I know Michelle, and she is a terrific person and a really, really, really popular member of the DUP. So, those are just facts, David. I'm sorry if they're inconvenient and you're on a row.
I'm not. I have no horse in the race, I can assure you. Michael, you've been part of a couple.
Well, I've no horse in the race either, and I wouldn't have Tim's insight into the bubbling factions of the DUP.
But you've been part. But you've been part of a number of leadership contests in the SDLP, and you've seen those up close. So, what do you think? Do you think contest or coronation?
Well, firstly, I think a contest can be good. It can clear the air. It just depends on the circumstances and so on. I don't think deputy leader is universally inconsequential. I mean, it's whatever the party wants it to be. Seamus Mallon couldn't be described as inconsequential or some kind of shrinking violet. Of the three candidates mentioned, the nicest fit is Emma Pengelly, So you have the leader there at Westminster doing a job, and you've Emma Pengelly leading the party in Belfast and Stormont. I agree with Tim. I think Michelle McElveen is a very quietly effective person, and I think she could probably do the job very well and would work well with Gavin Robinson. Jonathan Buckley is a bit of an enfant terrible for the DUP. He's ready to weigh in anywhere with any kind of an argument. So I don't think he'd be a good choice. I would like them to have a contest because it might give us all a bit more insight into where the bubbling factions all are. But I take Tim's point from the DUP point of view, from Gavin Robinson's point of view. Michelle McElveen being quietly chosen without an election is probably the best outcome for the party.
And Tim, that's the question that you talk about, the media narrative. I mean, this is the question we're all talking about. I mean, we talked about the programme for government there. Emma Pengelly has been the face of the executive's media response to that. She's been out doing all the main interviews. She's the Deputy First Minister. I mean, Michelle O'Neill is the First Minister, but she's also the Vice President of Sinn Fein. So why is Emma Pengelly not going for this spot?
Because I think Gavin wants to use this position. This is, and I don't know it. This is my guess. I think Gavin wants to use this position to bring about internal party reform, and I think that's what he wants to change things. He wants to go out to have someone who can go to the branches and start to reconstitute the branches, who can start to get membership growing, can start to see those branches be more effective within local areas, start to build local areas so that electorally they've got a strategy. Some of the stuff we were talking about with Owen Tennyson last week about how you reach into different areas across Northern Ireland, and I think he's acutely aware that party membership has fallen over the last number of years since Peter Robinson ceased to be leader, and he needs someone who can be focused full time on building that internal operation. You can't do that if you're Deputy First Minister. Emma is doing a fantastic job as Deputy First Minister. She's Northern Ireland's most popular politician right now, which, all power to her. She's done a fabulous job, and she needs to keep doing what she's doing. Her focus can't be taken away and diverted from that to be building branches in Fermanagh and Tyrone and those sorts of places where the work needs to be done. Michelle can do that because she's been working on the ground internally in the DUP for 15 years now as a senior party officer. So I think that step up makes sense to me, that's someone who can be focused on where things need to change internally. And I think she'll be great at that job.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the pod. It was a great discussion today. We went around the houses and covered an awful lot there. As well. Just to remind you, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, with what you're hearing, and also suggest topic ideas just that you would like us to discuss, you can WhatsApp us with your questions or comments. Ideally use a voice note so that we can actually play it out on the podcast. That number is 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont so we can read out your message or play your voice note. That's all we have time for this edition of Stormont Sources. Thank you for listening. Please remember to keep in touch with your questions, comments and ideas. That's all from Tim, Michael and myself. We will see you next week. That was great, guys. That was really